Hello, my name is Joanna Lesnierowska, and I am a member of the research project Performance, Conservation, Materiality Knowledge at HKB in Bern. And today I have a great pleasure to talk to Rok Vevar and ask him the two questions. So Rok is living in Ljubljana. He's a dance historian, curator, and activist. And in 2012, he has established a temporary Slovenian dance archives in his own apartment. But in 2018, he managed to move it to the Museum of Contemporary Art Metelkova in Ljubljana. Since 2012, he is also co-curating the International Dance Festival, Co-Festival in Ljubljana, and he's a member also of a Nomad Dance Academy Slovenia, and the festival headquarters are based in Kino Šiška. Rok is also an author of books, and a selection of his reviews and articles was published in the book Deadline in 2011. And in 2018, he has edited also the book Anthology of Contemporary Slovene Journalism. And then he followed with a monograph on Ksenia Hribar and her London years that was published in 2020. Rok, for his work, has been awarded the Ksenia Hribar Award, and in 2020, a Vladimir Kraj Recognition Award for his achievements in the field of dance history and archivism in Slovenia. Rok, welcome to our two questions series. I'm very happy that we managed to meet and you found the time for us. So thanks very much for joining. And here are my two questions. Can performance be conserved? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And the second question is, what does it mean to conserve performance?
I would say the first question, can performance be conserved? If so, how? If not, why not? I would say that both answers, yes and no, are somehow true. Also, I perhaps, in order for me to explain to myself what do we do when we are dealing with the performances that are no longer alive somehow, I think I would perhaps, for me, the term to conserve is perhaps not the most suitable one, I have to admit. Although historically we know that certain pieces are just going on. I mean, in the ballet, we know that we have some pieces that are present constantly from the 19th century throughout the 20th century, but the question is how they are really conserved. Are they really conserved, or what it changes, of course. On the other hand, of course, I kind of can agree with Peggy Fallon claiming that there are elements of live performances that never repeat. Like, she titled this book in which she elaborated on it Unmarked, and of course there are things in the live performance that never go to the level of sign, that they are the matter of unsignified, are matter of the live event itself, which I guess contains some information for the people who are present at this live event, but they cannot be conserved, reconstructed, restaged. Although I think they can be to a certain degree historicized or studied or speculated upon. And I think, for example, if we say that it's impossible to conserve singular performances because there is certain aspect of them which is fundamentally absent, I think this is exactly what um, initiates our desire to learn about them. And it's very basic curiosity, I think. The curiosity which is connected to the every historiographic work or every work or thinking about some past events or past times. We are, I think, a lot of us are fundamentally curious about some events from the past. And this is something that one cannot stop. And it would also be insensible to stop that. But as I said, I would say that for me, mm, the terms, let's say, I mean, the other terms are more suitable, or what I personally do, it's, or how I understand also my curiosity, maybe it's not it's not so eager to conserve anything, or I cannot connect so much with people who would like to conserve things, because I think in time they change. But what I do, it's more connected, let's say, with the terms of archiving, historicizing, studying. And of course, I'm always interested in pieces that, in singular pieces that have been reconstructed or restaged, or also in artistic way historicized and researched. Um, I think Olga de Soto did the green table of Curtius in the very specific way, for example, although the piece is still being restaged around, or it can be. So I mean, this is something that I would kind of connect more. Um, mm, yeah, I think this human curiosity is connected with the questions of what happened, why it happened, and how it happened. Um, Also, we know, for example, and I think it's not connected just to the performing arts or contemporary dance, but these questions are connected with this generic, general historiographic curiosity. Mm, and we know, I think, like in the Deleuzian sense, Deleuze would claim that the simple repetition just hides the fact that there are differences between original and rerun or repetition, or yeah. So I think also with the case of Swan Lake, although it's supposed to be the Swan Lake itself, I guess it's always different case of Swan Lake in the certain sense. And yeah, with the case of Swan Lake, there is also, for example, one very interesting case that during the 1950s, when Balanchine did the restaging of the Swan Lake in New York, it generated some very different public. The LGBT community would take the case of Swan Lake as the kind of cruising space, and at the time when most of people were closeted because it was illegal to be homosexual in America in the 1950s, as in many places in the world. They would take this as some certain kind of sacred space, and this public would come again and would come again and would come again, and they would basically contextually, in terms of reception, change this Swan Lake in the way. And I think for me, of course, the question is mm, what is mm, uh, what, for example, in the case of restagings, what is restage and or how the piece behaves. I think uh, also in my work, trying to study historicizing the pieces that no longer exist, I think there is a specific kind of work connected to it. Uh, I think it's the matter of textual and contextual, if we stay in this um, linguistic, let's say, terminology. Um, uh, it's the matter of studying, historicizing context, and of course, a singular text that perhaps the singular performance is. For me, in terms of, for example, dance work, uh, it's very, very interesting. And in many cases, the only possible way to get to this absent object is understanding context in which it was initially created. And in many cases, it's so this is why I think rather than to conserve, to historicize, study, perhaps restage in some cases, terms are much more suitable because it's always so much connected to the contextual understanding. Uh, and I guess this curiosity it has to generate a certain kind of historiographic imagination as well. Uh, it's not just the matter of facts which are present in the documents, it's also the matter of speculations, how it happened, why it happened, what happened. I think, but to answer the question, how are we curious about, let's say, dance work in the broader sense of it, I think what is available to us are different traces, different documents and material evidences that are available to us. But then I guess the matter of expertise or competencies is also connected with the question, how do we imagine things? How do we how much we can speculate on things to be able to somehow imagine this absent event or work. I mean, it's yeah. Uh, and because I'm recently so much busy with the notion of something that I call public time, because I think for me public spaces and public sphere is basically connected to the question of let's say, time and traces in time, or awareness of time, and with this time also certain kind of physical practice are connected. And mm, I always say that in certain kind of, let's say, contexts and historical periods when public sphere was very intense, I always claim that the different performances contain each other. So that means that, for example, to understand the singular piece from the certain period, it's very instrumental to know about the bigger corpus of production from the period. Mm, because in order for one to imagine a singular piece from the documents, even notations and so on, it's good to know as much as it is possible around. Um, in the recent years, I'm also very busy with, or I was busy with kind of speculations about, for example, the history of theater. It's very selective, and in order for us to imagine, for example, the 19th century, in which the theater production was the biggest, I think, in history, the most of the houses, theater houses, were built in this period. In no other period, so many, and so on. For example, the history of theater was very selective what was valuable in this period. So many things were just not considered valuable enough. But my claim is that all the commercial productions from the 19th century, all this entertainment and kitsch and everything, it's a very instrumental information of what we nowadays consider valuable, for example. You know, basically everything around contextual things are very uh, very valuable information when one then deals with a singular piece. Or even in the 20th century, in the field of contemporary dance, we have to admit that the production was huge, and there are many, many performances about we don't know anything. And they were in this kind of historiographic selection just erased from the history. But these pieces can be informative when one deals with the singular ones. Mm, and also, for example, what I'm also busy with in imagining some cases, it's something that I would call these initial kinesthetic openings. These kind of historical moments when a certain regime of choreography or physical presence was introduced through a singular piece, and the public body was prepared for it or responded to it in this kind of almost in terms of some kind of physical and cognitive epiphany, this kind of revolutionary experience of a certain choreographic regime or certain understanding of the body in front of you. And this, I think, it's very different. It's very difficult task to tackle this particular moment. And I think they exist through the history. I think, for example, if we think about certain kind of paradigmatic choreographers or pieces, uh, we always, in some cases, we realize that some pieces were received, the reception of the pieces was kind of possible 10 years after their premiere or something, uh, when certain public body was prepared to perceive these bodies in a certain way or pieces in a certain way. And I think, yeah, these are these kind of mm, very important historical moments when these things happen. And I think these moments could be, or it's very hard to reconstruct them. One can speculate on them, or they may be the matter of literature or fiction. I don't know. This is the possibility to speculate on them. And I think in these cases, certain important historical events are basically very close to what some writers are dealing with. Uh, they try to imagine how did it feel, or what was understanding of a certain thing in the history. And yeah, I mean, this is uh, I would say that one has to realize that uh, one cannot objectively do this historiographic work. One have to include some kind of uh, historiographic empathy or imagination, or yeah, and it also, it doesn't mean that it's objectively correct. But in some cases, also these interpretations can help and channel through a certain kind of reception uh, of the singular pieces. For example, like 15 years ago, I saw for the first time the Martha Graham Dance Company performing here in the region in Trieste, and I saw Lamentation for the first time, this famous solo from the early 30s, and uh, which obviously went from the body to body till this point. I guess it's changed and transformed to a certain extent. Uh, but what was interesting for me was watching this live and realizing that the video or film material or these audio visual traces or documents are in some cases not very helpful. They inform to a certain extent um, about the structure or certain things, but this physical presence was something that was very powerful, very, very powerful live. And I was then, for example, watching this, I was speculating what it did to the spectators of the early 30s, how powerful it uh, perhaps had been. And yeah, it must have been. Uh, in when basically kind of dance invented a certain kind of mode of modernistic form of or expression that was so suggestive and so heavy in the sense. And I'm always then I speculated, for example, how this singular solo corresponded with a certain kind of uh, working class physicality at the time when the industrial work was still very, very manual and physical in the industrial production. and how this physicality of Martha Graham corresponded with this paradigm of, let's say, labor. Mm, yeah, this is for me, and I think one could go through the history and isolate a certain kind of physicalities which at a certain historical moment correspond with the sensitivity and the thinking the most, or in the certain kind of very intensive way. I don't know. This is for, uh, and I think this what I call the initial kinesthetic openings, these physical events, would be for me a certain kind of event in the sense of how Alain Badiou's is developing the notion of event in his philosophy. Certain uh, happenings that split time in two, that basically intervene in the linear time in the way that they that the time becomes before and after. You know, it's and they change the way, I would say, the subjectivities of what would be the public is formed afterwards. And I think I think because dance is at the same time uh, in terms of reception very cognitive uh, process and very sensitive, sensual at the same time or together. I think we always, the people who still work in the field of dance or who decide to work in the field of dance, they have these particular moments in their biography when which basically hooked them, or after which they decided that they will stay and work in the field. They can be connected also with some movies, dance movies, or some live events mostly. Yeah. When you realize this is something that I'm going to do in my life. And yeah, and I guess these are connected with a certain kind of perceptive physicality and thought that opens up. Uh, yeah.
What was your moment, Rok, when you decided
It-
to open your archives and started, especially that we just
I
heard
mean,
on the beginning, you did it first in your own apartment. So I understand that it was your private initiative, a
what was
desire.
what was my kind of initial moment of this initial kinesthetic opening? I think the archiving work came um, like a decade afterwards. Um, in the 1990s, when the Republic of Slovenia was a very young state, this was the period when the contemporary dance field was very vivid, and also the import of different pieces from different dance contexts would increase a lot. So we would have an opportunity to watch pieces almost every second week or something. There's some very important pieces that would come from abroad. And I guess there are some. I remember, for example, one very historically insignificant uh, performance of London Contemporary Dance School performing in Ljubljana in 93 or 94. And it's just made a great impact on me. I was not thinking very much what happened, but then I think at the time the physical theater was very popular, so I was very enthusiastic theater goer, and then contemporary dance was through the physical theater very organic uh, mm, way to enter the dance field. And I what I kind of remember as this turning point was Joseph Naci's performance of Wojciech in the May of 95 in Ljubljana. And mm, I remember that after 3 minutes, I was thinking, I knew that something like this existed. It was just this kind of almost exactly the sentence that went to my mind. I was just obviously kind of prepared for it, and I kind of thought, "Aha, I knew that something like this existed." And it was just very, very impressive. And then, of course, mm, I saw a lot of other different things at the time, and I was kind of hooked. Uh, but
And
maybe I
what made you start your archive then?
what made me start my archive. Uh, mm, at a certain point, I felt that just being a spectator was not enough for me, and I realized that information about the past of contemporary dance was too much on the level of anecdotes. So I had to start to mm, research research it a little bit more precisely, and I started just basically I was collecting basically different materials after every performance, theater leaflets, catalogs, and so on. In any case, also, also during the 90s. But then uh, in, I think in 2008, I uh, systematized some materials from the NEA course who was employed in something that in Slovenia we call the Public Fund for Amateur Culture, or for yeah, for amateur culture, for people's culture, and she was employed there to for programming contemporary dance education, and she co-curated the festival which was called Dance Days and so on. So she retired, and this material stayed. All, I mean, huge collection of uh, different, different materials, photos, different leaflets, program lists, notes, reviews, different articles, and so on. So I would systematize this in their public library of this amateur fund for amateur public fund for amateur culture, and then we would realize after a while, a year after, that this document started to disappear. So with Nina Meshko, who was employee of this amateur public fund for amateur culture, and she was contemporary dance expert in the organization, we would decide that I would take them home, and then people would know that I'm very interested in collecting the materials, so they would, when they would move or something, they would deposit their materials to me, and then I would realize at a certain point that this is maybe the starting point of an archive. Yeah, basically, archive informed me that it started to exist somehow, and then I organized different also events and presentations in my apartment, also some students from different university programs would come, and then in one of this kind of events, Ida Herschenfelder, who was in charge for the digitalization of materials in the Museum of Contemporary Art Metelkova and Modern Gallery, would come, and with Zdenka Badovinac, director of the museum, they would invite me to come into residency with my archive to the Museum of Contemporary Art Metelkova, and it happened in April 2018. And then it started to develop out of this. And I think I somehow managed to get also some other people interested, or I managed to mm, recruit some other people who are passionate about this in our region, also in Serbia and Macedonia and Croatia. So now we are collaborating on one digital database and so on, and on researches, and yeah. So yeah, this is how it started and developed. Uh, yeah.
What is the meaning of this practice? Why do you find archiving meaningful to the degree that you decided to take this responsibility on your own in the moment when nobody was even thinking about it?
Why I think this work is meaningful. Um, I think for me, I have to say that archiving of dance is not connected exclusively to curiosity about the singular dance pieces. I think that dance practices contain certain information uh, that tell us about the uh, that tell us about how in the certain historical periods people dealt with their bodies, physicalities. I think what mm, dance practices contain, it's are is information about many things. I guess it's uh, many things connected to social behaviors, political circumstances, about labor, about culture, about identities and differences, about different physical systems that are used in the certain periods. For me, it's always interesting to notice how much modern dance practices and techniques are connected with the mm, muscular and bone structures. If I kind of refer a little bit to the BMC practices. So, and I think this is exactly what can tell us a lot about how these physicalities that were still part of the manual work in the industrial contexts were uh, connected to artistic creativity. Basically, it's the question: what were people able to do with the certain kind of bodies that existed, and how they, what kind of reflection of the on work was present in the way that they were artistically developed or used, or Yeah, so this is, I mean, this is all, these are all for me very, very interesting questions. And for example, when I was writing the book about Ksenia Hribar, who was a dancer choreographer from Ljubljana, Slovenia, she established dance theater of Ljubljana in the mid 80s, but before she was involved from the beginning, from the mid 60s, with the development of the British dance, British contemporary dance at the time. I was when I was preparing and researching for writing this book, I realized, for example, that studying the singular pieces, I realized that maybe some pieces that were not very successful at the time, or not even the, or they were not so interesting for the public at the time, may be much more interesting for us at this moment. For example, Robert Cohen, who was the pedagogue of the London Contemporary Dance School and the main choreographer for London Contemporary Dance Theatre, this company that was developed out of the school, he, between 69 and 73, developed certain pieces that would deal with the way that groups of people behave. And it was interesting. One it was called Cell, and it was very successful. Then it was piece called X and Mass, and also two pieces called People Alone and People Together. All these pieces were dealing with the kind of behavioristic research of people and how these behaviors could be transposed into the choreographic media or medium or choreographic regime, let's say. And it was interesting when I realized that uh, it was interesting reading reviews about these pieces because only photos and reviews exist. And critics were very honest about the problems they had with the material in front of them. How basically they were a little bit honest about their material blindness. So they basically cannot really enter the materials and organisms in front of their eyes. And they would also very precisely, kind of analytically describe what was happening in front of their eyes. And also they would compare it with the certain pieces that they knew from the from the theaters at the time that would come to tour or you know. And I realized afterwards that maybe these pieces uh, and the way Robert Cohen was describing his way into them, his kind of creative approach, intentions, or uh, let's say conceptualization of his choreographic interests, these pieces are much more interesting nowadays for us because we know, for example, the piece that you produce, co-produce or produce or curate, collective jumps of Isabel Schad, would very much correspond with these examples of X and Mass of Robert Cohen from the early 70s. Uh, for example, critics at the time would have a problem in their reviews. They would articulate this, that you don't have a succession of group, solo, duo, trio, group, and so on, like the kind of regular compositional procedures from the period. The group would be on the stage all the time and something would come out of it and go back into it and so on. And for them, it would be quite evident that there are people in front of them, not choreographic or dance forms. So it wouldn't correspond, although it was for them to a certain extent abstract with the Cunningham that they knew at the time.
Mm.
They would know that although there is no story on the stage, these are living people dancing in front of them. So they have this certain kind of social composition element to them, and this is for me, for example, in this way, uh, I guess it's the matter of maybe not conserving, but understanding from context a certain kind of intention that was
Mm.
present there.
Mm.
And for me, this is one of, and it's mm, in many cases for me, in order to get to a singular piece or the concrete work, stage work, I guess it's always going from the outside to, or basically, it's the matter of how I can come close to it. And it's of course it's not possible to be present there because you can't uh, turn around time, but it's the matter of getting close from the contextual data and interrogation of different documents to the somehow to the piece, to the surrounding of the piece, let's say. Yeah.
You have mentioned earlier a very beautiful and fascinating idea to me. I wanted to ask you more about that because we associate archiving with the facts, with the remnants of performances, with pictures, with writings about the performance and the process of it. Coming either from the reviews or even from the materials of artists themselves, and the testimonies maybe of people who have witnessed the performances, but it's all really centered around the facts, the knowledge. But you have mentioned that to really be successful in dealing with the historical events that are not existing anymore, you need to develop a certain historiographic empathy and
Mm,
imagination,
mm.
which of course it's doesn't sound that much as this factual knowledge. So I wanted to ask you, how do you practice this skill?
For me, I guess, I mean, how do you practice this is basically trying to imagine, and then, of course, I think it's a little bit connected with the way also some authors write about certain kind of periodical topics. What is useful in this regard, it's not only the data connected to the, let's say, performances, even dance context, but a lot of things around. I think material or immaterial culture, in order for you to imagine the way the culture functioned or the way people lived in the certain period.
It does sound to me like maybe we should have actually questioned whether it is relevant and make any sense at all to preserve performance, or rather we should focus on reconstruction of its reception coming through the witnesses and the materials that are actually reporting on how the performance and the event itself has been received and experienced by the audience that had a chance to be there live and the performances.
This is, I mean, to kind of reconstruct a reception is something that I'm very enthusiastic about. I'm I imagine, for example, certain archival series that would focus on dense experiences and certain kind of testimonies or narrations about them, and they would connect with people who with basically creators and spectators, because this kind of, let's say, crucial things, or maybe just because mm, there are things that, for example, in my seasons as a spectator, which now lasts for more than, yeah, around almost 30 years, the spectator of dance, I think that the habits, how we perceive things, and also I think abilities, or our sensoric body also has changed in these 30 years. I think uh, because of different reasons, including the amount of sensoric information that we are exposed to these days, I guess our perception of possibility of perception of the dense piece or singular dense piece has changed. Uh, I remember, for example, this is also what I'm kind of interested in, mm, because when I started to watch dance in the early 90s in Republic of Slovenia, the whole, let's say, the political, cultural, and social situation was in the very transformative period. It was the new state, and I think the public understood that mm, things change and things are not the same uh, for the whole time. You know that things are, at the time, I think the people understood that society, politics, communities of people change, and this openness to get some answer what all this can become. People were very open to be confronted with the most also difficult kind of, let's say, choreographic examples. Um, and this is for me very interesting because I think, and we tend to forget about this kind of the culture of a certain regime of perception of dance. This is this is for me kind of very interesting topic. Although, as I claimed or had said before, it's very hard to um, kind of reconstruct, fix this, or tackle these things.
Mm.
Also, I was thinking in the recent period, and also I wrote it in one article, in the performing arts in general, for example, in my country, in this period from the 1980s to the 1990s, I would say that theater itself uh, uh, was in the very, very specific position because um, political failures in the period were very much connected with the possibility that the promise one can give in the terms of linguistic articulations, public speaking, let's say, was not very reliable medium of transforming of info. So what politicians would promise, or the promises that would be made in the public sphere, were very unreliable, or even they would go to the level of lies. So the language became very, at the time, very unreliable medium of trans of channeling info. So at the time, I think the people who were regular theater goers, we were very much convinced that this classical drama theater is basically dead for good, so that it won't return or that it's dying out, and that it cannot reform in the proper way because it cannot um, mm, kind of uh, communicate any truthful things. So it was inflation and devaluation of language itself. It was very interesting thing because recently I was listening to one political analyst and historian, Masha Gessen, analyzing the Russian context in this Putin period, and she claimed the same, how journalism was exposed to the very hard task of dealing with the language or channeling the information through because of this mm, degradation of language. And in this, as I mentioned, in this period from the 1980s to 1990s, the physical practice or physical approach to theater would be one way to kind of transgress this uh, hard task of getting things across. And so the theater and dance also, it was, I think, also in other contexts similar kind of marriage. But anyway, I think in Slovenian context, or it was even more kind of intense, this notion that physical theater or physicality in theater could substitute this language inflation present, and this also catalyzed then certain kind of inventions in the choreographic practices. And this as this regimes of receptions from the certain historical period, I think it's very hard to reconstruct. But I think it's, for me, it's interesting to think and write about it, or
But
yeah.
do you think it is interesting to then restage?
I guess in some cases, yes. In some cases, this can be uh, it. I mean, I'm always the first one at the door when the theater opens, when things are staged in any way, like because of this curiosity. But then I'm also always interrogating what I see with the things that I kind of know or speculate about or learn. For example, I saw one duet of two dancers, choreographers, Pino and Pia Mlakar, who were active in the 30s, 40s, early 50s, and already in the 1920s. One duet, it was called The Bav, and it was staged in Germany in the late 1930s. And the piece was restaged in the ballet of the Ljubljana Opera House. Uh, and it was restaged from the labanotations of the piece. And I was speculating while watching the piece, which I think it was very precisely kind of staged from these notations. Um, and I felt that maybe this piece is kind of trembling of the control of trying to get it right. And I was thinking that maybe in the original it was much more spontaneous, much more, I guess, free, in the sense that some maybe decisions would be made more easily to execute certain things in the different way, or and sometimes I feel that that these restagings, reconstructions may, of course, they are something else.
But
They are
but
they
as
are doc-
yeah, I'm sorry. No, but as you already said, I mean, history tends to abandon certain works of arts, maybe claiming that they are irrelevant artistically, and restaging actually adds value to the works we choose to restage. So I think about it very often. You know, you come from Slovenia, I come from Poland. We share a lot of history, and everything you just said about the political context and the valuation of language. We all know this experience, and we also know why physical theater was so strong in our communist time and could become a way into contemporary dance. It didn't happen in Poland. It does maybe happen more in Balkans in general. But I think in this regard, it is extremely interesting, the notion of what we decide to restage, what works, and also how we do it, bearing responsibility to the original, how far we can intervene and how far we rather should reactivate, taking into consideration also all this intangible information, empathic information we derive from everything we know about the period and people.
I think that the different historical periods would choose different dance works for stagings. Usually, I guess it's called. I mean, I guess it's connected to this to a certain present interests uh, of certain period. This is one thing, uh, and it's interesting what certain periods would decide to leave out. And what they would perceived as not really valuable. This is also for me interesting information.
Or a
The
threat,
things that are
or
sorry,
as a threat,
as
as a threat.
yeah,
It's
maybe,
also maybe something is left out because it's considered invaluable, or something is left out because it's considered dangerous to certain agendas, propagandas.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I guess there are different reasons why things are left out, but which always informs us also about the period, you know. But there is mm, mm, something else I had in mind. Mm, mm, I think, yeah, this is what I wanted to say. I think restagings are the possible mm, results or mm, results or mm, outcomes of what, let's say, archival work can do or generate. We can, I mean, the fact is that we are dealing with in the archives or in the research or in historiographic work with the certain documents, yeah, with different documents in a certain way, or we systematize them, categorize them, study them, trying to, and so on. But I think this, I mean, research can also generate documents, let's say, mm, or can make interpretations, or it can do something with available materials. And I think restagings are one way of research, interpretation, uh, mm, and I think it's always the matter of how they are and with what they are equipped when they are presented. How they are mm, somehow put into the public realm, how they are equipped with, I don't know, talks, lectures, uh, comments. Yeah, I mean, it's for sure there something appears in front of our eyes, which I think is valuable, but at the same time is the for me the result of interrogating different documents or notations or yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so mm, it's for me, I think, but also it's the matter of this very fundamental notion of care in the historiographic realm, basically of curating, caring, curating, and facilitating mm, a certain kind of mm, public time to the particular regime of reception of dance. For me, it's very, uh, for me, it's kind of important and valuable that in 2024 that uh, that we make sure that certain historical data or documents or information are present no matter time how time selects them in this it's yeah it's for me it's very important if we don't want to pretend that the contemporary dance started 5 minutes ago, that we take care that the time is somehow present, because also we have to realize that the traces of the dance practices and artistic works are present in these actual bodies who dance different pieces nowadays anyway, you know. And this is also what kind of I'm interested in. Yeah, different bodies that are present in the now, the dancers' bodies as a certain kind of spectral or traces of a certain previous periods, and mm, different approaches to dance and choreography and so on.
To wrap up the our talk, uh, I was actually wondering, listening to you, how your research, being a researcher and a historian and archivist, how does it go along and how does it influence or not your writing on dance practice? Because we know you as an author of reviews. You have published anthologies not only of your own texts, but
Mhm.
also of a text of other authors over several decades of Slovenian dance criticism. And then you are still active as curator and you write often about dance. I'm actually wondering how, in your practice as a dance writer, as a journalist, as critic, your knowledge and awareness of archivism is present. How does it influence your work?
No, I mean, I have to be very clear that I don't write reviews anymore. Although I think that if I would write them these days, they would be much more interesting than they were when I was writing on dance. I think for me, mm, um, mhm, for me, this let's say historical materials are the fundamental things for me to understand choreographic approaches, different, let's say, choreographic regimes and physicalities on stage. Because uh, what also I'm what I think I'm interested in the in the sense of historicizing are certain kind of, I would say, them epistemological terms in dance, in terms of what dance practitioners or contexts or knew, or how they were able to know something about dance in the certain periods, and what it happened that it changed, that this changed. The ideas or approaches that would change the way that the dance and choreography were approached in the certain periods. And I'm interested in these crucial points when this knowledge basically was turned around, or when it something opened up, or these are for me the most informative moments in order for me to understand what then was developed after. Or when I was writing reviews, I tried to contextualize things always, but because I quit really writing reviews in 2011, it's I think mm, I think at the time I was aware of certain things that I'm talking about them now to a certain extent, but not enough, really. I think mm, it's this is also very interesting, because now these days I'm realizing that the young writers uh, are in their in accumulating their experiences or information on dance much more quicker uh, mm, in learning than I was, or my generation of writers. This is also very interesting aspect of knowing mm, things about dance. That, for example, now with different technologies, also YouTube, different audiovisual information, they can go very quickly through the certain level of information, so they are very well informed about this, I don't know, certain aspects, structures, that I was not able to be at the time. You know what I mean? Yeah, we had to watch things live, and it went a little bit slower, um, and but and you accumulated certain kind of information, experiences, and so on. But nowadays, these writers are much more quick. But in the certain, of course, you cannot. Uh, there are certain aspects that you cannot jump over. It just they have to come gradually, or so. But for me, this, let's say, temporal aspect of knowing about dance, or perception about dance, was always very important. So mm, what was before, and how it was, and what it became, and what it means now, these things were always very important to me, even when I was writing reviews. Although the amount of info that was available for me at the time was perhaps not so um, extended. And also, I think we maybe for the and this is something that it's also interesting for me, and it's connected with the way that we know about dance, or perceive dance. uh, I realized that through the history in Slovenia, you had the choreographers who would receive certain info and transform it into their own work would have very different, let's say, paradigmatic roles. Or, for example, in the certain period, they would read about the dance that was happening around and in different contexts, and they would understand this and imagine certain things from text and use it in their own work. Then you would